So this is what pops into my head when I hear of this cauldron of the Dagda. And of course, I've put my head here on this little glow, right? So again, was it a cauldron? And was he doing magical spells? Or was it a reaction vessel? And this individual was doing chemical reactions. So again, when you evaluate this story of the cauldron of the Dagda from the perspective of chemistry, we can see here that the cauldron may not have been in fact a cauldron, but it could have been a chemical vessel, something like an alembic or a distillation retort or something of that nature. So now moving in a little bit of a different direction, again, just some more stories from the ancient world that I believe that can be reinterpreted from the perspective of chemistry. So looking at some of these tales from the Bible, again, the biblical character of Jesus turning water into wine. Again, if you look at that from the perspective of chemistry, it could have been a very cool chemical reaction that was indeed misinterpreted by the layperson as being magic or some sort of godly powers. And I was able to find this online. This is a real life picture of Jesus transforming water into wine. And this is his face after the reaction was completed. And I absolutely love these Leonardo DiCaprio face memes. They're extremely funny. So I think it's very interesting to reinterpret the biblical character of Jesus as an initiate of these sacred ancient mysteries, a practitioner of chemistry, and to reevaluate some of the miracles and stories from the Bible from the perspective of chemistry. Again, I think it enriches the story and it makes it more compelling and realistic as opposed to being some sort of ancient magic. All right, so let's take it back to Egypt and discuss one of my favorite stories from the ancient world that I believe can be reinterpreted from the perspective of chemistry. So the story of Moses and the Pharaoh and their dueling magic. So Moses is summoned into the chambers of the Pharaoh. And there's all of these onlookers there that are prepared to witness this competition between Moses and the Pharaoh, where they demonstrate the power of their gods, right? So this is ancient magic, this godly power that we know is actually chemistry. So Moses walks into the chambers of the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh is there, and he has a white staff, right? This white compressed rod, and we don't know what the material is that it's made from, but he knows what it is. And Moses walks in and he has his white rod. Again, this compressed white rod. You don't know what the material is, but Moses knows what it is. So they walk into the gallery of the Pharaoh and they begin to do their demonstrations of the power of God. So the Pharaoh lays down his staff. And again, it's just this white staff that's laying on the ground. And he pours a clear liquid on the staff. And all of a sudden, this white staff begins to transform into a steaming, writhing black snake on the ground. And the onlookers in the gallery are gasping and a little bit of terror. Oh, what is this? Again, they think it's this mysterious, godly magic. But again, Moses and the Pharaoh know that this is just a very simple chemical reaction and that the Pharaoh's rod, this compressed white rod, was actually made of sugar. So he's got a rod of sugar that he sets on the ground. And the liquid that he pours onto the sugar is actually sulfuric acid. And the reaction proceeds, and the sugar begins to transform and react and create again this black snake of carbon that's steaming and writhing on the ground. So Moses is watching this reaction as it proceeds, and the onlookers are in terror, and Moses is just sitting there grinning, nodding his head with this look on his face. So that's pretty cool what you got going on there. Well, check this shit out. So Moses proceeds and he sets his staff on the floor. And again, it looks the exact same as what the Pharaoh set down, this compressed white rod. And Moses sets the tip of his white rod on fire, and this electric blue flame ignites, and all of a sudden these tentacles begin to form, and this absolutely terrifying compound that is produced from the combustion of mercury thiocyanate. And this video is from the Nile Red channel in a reaction called the Pharaoh's serpent. And you can imagine how the onlookers would perceive a chemical reaction of this nature. Because again, the Pharaoh laid down a white rod, it turns into this black steaming rod. And Moses lays down his white rod and he sets it on fire. And all of a sudden it turns into this ghastly looking compound that actually terrifies everyone in the room. And of course, Moses knows that he's the superior magician, the superior chemist, and he has just outdone the Pharaoh and terrified everyone in the room. So again, hopefully I will be able to insert a video here, and it's either going to be the video from the Nile Red channel, or it'll be an excerpt from one of the interviews I did with Alan on the Sacred Geometry Decoded channel. It's going to be a bit repetitive in terms of the material that I just discussed, but it's one of my proudest moments. I'm very, very happy with how this particular edit came out. So hopefully that will be inserted here. And you and I were talking a bit about this, and if you could put the videos in here, it would be awesome. So there's a story in the Bible where Moses is called into the inner chambers of the Pharaoh, and they have a demonstration and a competition using magic. And they both come in with staffs, and they lay their staffs on the floor, and they do magic conjurations, and all of a sudden they turn into snakes. So I have a bit of a different interpretation of that story.
Aaron, cast down my staff before Pharaoh, that he may see the power of God.
The power of your God is a cheap magician's trick. Join us.
And if you look at magic from the perspective of chemistry, again, to the uninitiated and somebody that did not understand the applications of the science, chemistry is absolutely magic. And you put in that.
There's an Arthur Clarke quote. Any sufficiently advanced technology would appear as if magic.
Absolutely. And I love that. And it even still applies today, you know, as we get more advanced. I remember the first time I saw a BlackBerry when I was a kid. We went to my uncle's house and he pulls out the BlackBerry, and I had never seen anything like that. You know, it was this tiny device with internet and all. I was like, what is the internet? You know, it could have been a device used for teleportation for everything that I knew. And I could barely comprehend what he was saying looking at this thing. And now, you know, we carry these things around like it was nothing. But I really distinctly remember the first time I saw that.
Yeah.
And it could have been a magic device, you know.
I'm admitting my age here, but I remember just when a mobile phone was Star Trek technology, and this would never happen in our lifetimes. And yet here we are. The libraries of the world are on our little box we carry in our pocket.
And I'm a bit of a, you know, an antiquarian when it comes to technology. And even my brother and sister have these little, you know, the Apple watches where they can text, they have their grocery person shopping for groceries, and they're texting, like it's Star Trek or Dick Tracy or something like that, where they have these little communication devices. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So anyway, so let's imagine that story of Moses and the Pharaoh dueling magic from the perspective of chemistry. So there's a great reaction where you can use sugar and sulfuric acid, and you get the sugar into a container and you pour sulfuric acid on it, and it very quickly creates this steaming snake of carbon. And it's this big black steaming kind of snake-like thing. So let's imagine, again, to the spectators watching this thing, the Pharaoh pulls out a rod, and it's this compressed white rod. And from a chemical perspective, we know that it's sugar, right? So the Pharaoh lays his sugar rod down on the floor and pours some sulfuric acid on it, and all of a sudden it transforms into this big black steaming snake. And all of the spectators are in horror and shock and, watching this thing transform on the floor. And then walks in Moses, and he is the superior chemist. And he's looking at this simple reaction of sulfuric acid and sugar. He's kind of laughing to himself. He's like, oh, that's child's play compared to what I'm about to do. So he pulls out his staff, and it's also a compressed white rod. And to the spectators, it looks exactly the same. He lays it down on the floor and lights the tip on fire. And all of a sudden, there's the reaction of mercury thiosulfate. And when you set mercury thiosulfate on fire, it creates an absolutely spectacular reaction known as the Pharaoh's serpent. And even to me, or anybody watching this in the modern day, it is absolutely crazy to see this thing form. And there's this blue fire that comes out of it, and it almost looks like it appears out of the ether, the way that it materializes. And imagine the shock and terror of the spectators that are watching this thing. And it just keeps growing and growing, and it turns into this almost like octopus type thing with these multiple tentacles. And you've got the piddly little Pharaoh's black carbon snake laying on the ground, and this other thing just and Moses is sitting there like, yeah, that's what's up, because again, he's a superior chemist. And I think to look at these ancient stories from the perspective of chemistry, again, it's much more ingenuous to the science and the knowledge and the understanding of these ancient people. And the reason that we get the stories of magic is because it wasn't written by the chemists, it wasn't written by Moses or the Pharaoh. It was the spectators that saw this stuff and saw the transformations, and they had no explanation for it. They didn't understand it was a chemical reaction, and that these people were doing science when they thought it was just, literally snakes engulfing each other. So I always love looking at that story from that perspective. And again, pop the videos in here, because that reaction of the mercury thiosulfate is absolutely spectacular. And just imagine somebody watching that who didn't.
When we were kids, we were still allowed to have fireworks here in Australia, and one of the, it come a little silver foil sachet, was just called snakes. Yeah. You would light them on fire, and it would create the snake. But still now, people are in awe of fire. Like, you put on a fireworks show, people come to watch, and it's just really some basic reactions. If you add some copper, some cobalt, or just add by these basic chemicals in there, you get these colorful reactions. And even in this time where it's like literally at your fingertips to know what's happening, people are still amazed by the whiz and the bang and the colors of fireworks to this day. And this is at a time when we should all know about it, but go back, when it was a little bit more mysterious and esoteric, these kind of reactions would have been magical in the Harry Potter sense of the word, where people literally thought that the Magistar or the Magi was performing supernatural magic rather than something that could be replicated by the normal person.
Correct. All right, so what does all of this have to do with the Egyptian pyramids? Well, again, as I mentioned previously, I believe that by evaluating the mythology of the civilizations that actually built these structures, we can begin to better understand their true purpose. For example, the mythology surrounding the passage chamber structures of Ireland is more associated with these mythological gods, the Tuatha and magic, than they are with any sort of burial structure. So again, we know now that magic is indeed chemistry. So the mythology of ancient Ireland is telling us that these structures are connected to chemistry. And I believe the same to be true about the Egyptian pyramids. When you look into the mythology, for example, surrounding the Great